We need to make a decision on the UI design. Should we use the iOS design, the Android design, or both? Android and iOS differ greatly in the login process for Facebook. I'm assuming the reason for this is Apple's review process that places restrictions on what Facebook can do. I think starting with terms and conditions makes more sense. You get that out of the way and then proceed directly to user information. Other than that, for the most part, I chose to go with a design that looks more like the Android design for the sign-up wizard. Before I go into the code, let's look at the first form in the sign-up wizard so we understand what we are up against. We need to adapt the title area to landscape mode. We need to have different backcommand behavior for iOS. We need a rich text component to provide multi-line text with links. The first two are common to all the forms. To facilitate that, I decided to create a generic form that will handle all the stages of the sign-up form. I'll discuss that shortly. But first, let's discuss the rich text support. A very common request is support for rich text in Codename 1. This is hard to do in a generic, performant, cross-platform way, but can be done easily for simple tasks like this. Notice that for a lot of use cases, I would just use browser component. Here, that won't be ideal because I want deep integration with the UI and deep control. Since we already have an XML parser that's perfectly capable of parsing HTML, I decided to use a very simple HTML-based syntax. I also added support for bold and italic while demonstrating that simple things like line breaks still work. Let's go over the code step by step. This is a container. As we parse, we add elements into it. This is the HTML text we set. It's useful for the getText method. Font size is hard-coded in millimeters for simplicity. The event dispatcher lets us broadcast link-click events as action event. The following variables are used by the parser to store temporary parser state as it builds the UI. These are the fonts and constants we will use when the parser asks us to create a component. The constructors delegate to the init method, which in turn initializes the default fonts. Notice that the default layout is flow layout. We rely on that to allow aligning the text to the center or right. This method is invoked by the parser to add a component. If the string has a space, we split it to multiple separate strings, so each individual component can break a line in the flow layout. We add either a label or a button that looks like a label. The parser updates current link, so if we have a link, we are within an A tag and need to use a button style to look like a link. Current link value is the content of href. We just fire the listener event dispatcher with the href content as the source. If this isn't a link, it's a label. We remove the spaces, padding and margin. We then use the width of the space to re-add a space in the form of padding. This allows line breaks on word boundaries. The parser might need to remove a space for some special cases. For instance, if we close an A tag and place a dot right next to it. The setText method is the API that sets the HTML to this component. We wrap the HTML so it's well formed and parse the text using the parser inner class. These add listeners, so when a user clicks on a link, these listeners will receive the event from the event dispatcher. The next stage is the parser inner class. It's a bit big. we derive XML parser and override callback methods to tokenize the string. All the methods here are callbacks in a SAC-style parser. We also support a DOM style, but I chose a callback approach for performance. If the block element starts with a space, we add a space to the last block element. We remove the space from the previous component if the block doesn't end with a space. Here we handle the individual HTML tags we want to support by changing the current font or color. When a tag ends, we clear the current font, color, and restore the default. We don't handle complexity like tag nesting, etc. When we're in an A tag, we save the value of the href attribute for use in the event handler code. That's it. We now have a poor man's HTML renderer that we can use for simple blocks of highlighted text. We'll make use of it soon.